"2018 will go down as a year of extremes." The year began with a cold bite, the beast from the east leaving much of the county under a carpet of snow.
Kent woke up to some of the heaviest snowfall we've seen in recent years. It's been dubbed the beast from the east as winds swept in from Siberia.
Storm Emma has replaced the beast from the east, with snow turning to ice.
What followed was a 6-week spring washout.
A month's rain is said to have fallen across parts of Kent yesterday, leaving areas around the county's flood hotspots on high alert.
Rain poured and poured and poured some more. Then summer came, and the story couldn't have been more different.
The hot temperatures have threatened to break records in Kent.
Baking, boiling and blistering, scorching, sizzling or sweltering. However you've been describing the weather this summer, we can all agree it's been rather quite warm.
And while you and I may have found all that rather unsettling, farmers and the animals and crops they tend to have faced a relentless battle. In this special KMTV programme, we'll be looking back at the major weather phenomena of 2018, what it's meant for this year's harvest, and what could happen if this year of extremes could become a thing of the norm. It's picking time on Maidstone's Loddington farm. The orchard's lined with ripe and juicy Braeburns, ready for the harvest. A lush setting, but rewind to the end of February and Kent's fields were more reminiscent of a scene on a Christmas card. For almost a month, the county experienced an unprecedented cold spell. Heavy snowfall created chaos and temperatures dropped well below freezing during the beast from the east. For certain fruits, like apples, the prolonged winter may have added to the chilling period, but the icy blast has taken its toll on the Garden of England.
The challenge is the volume of fruit. That cold spell, the wet spell followed by very extreme temperatures, that variation did reduce the crop, so we're actually producing fewer apples than anticipated this year. It is hugely challenging in many different ways. So from a weather perspective, it was quite a difficult winter. Obviously, that really cold spell followed by a very wet spell means that you get behind in certain operations. Really challenging conditions. And then you come into the summer and you end up with a very challenging season from the perspective of little water, stressed up trees. There's always an issue when you've got a very stressed up plant about the opportunity for diseases and problems.
Shoppers could also soon pay the price. The beast from the east and later the immense heat may soon result in food prices going up by at least 5%. According to the Centre for Economics and Business Research, shoppers will have to fork out more than £7 extra each month due to the extreme conditions, and means 2018 is likely to be another burden on the food bills.
We have sort of slightly different challenges with apples and pears this year. So 2017 we had a very heavy frost in the spring which reduced our crop volume, which meant we sold that harvest really in record time. So we were out. There was no British fruit throughout the summer. So that price fluctuation from weather and the issues around lack of water and things really didn't affect our pricing. The bit that's very challenging now is that of course the continent also had a challenge with rainfall. They have a lot of small fruit which isn't suitable for their market. Across Europe they eat a larger size apple on average than a British consumer.
Kent and indeed much of the UK also had a challenge with rainfall. Spring saw parts of the county submerged for weeks. This would provide a lifeline later on for many arable farmers when the summer heatwave hit, but for livestock, the situation was dire. The 6-week washout coincided with the lambing season, and at Hadlow College, the conditions made it an arduous period for the 500 college ewes and for those helping them bring their lambs into the world.
For some people, it was devastating, particularly those people that were lambing outside in that wet weather, and I know of people that really came very, very close to the edge. because they was struggling just to get around and just trying to keep lambs alive outside in that cold, wet weather. It really is hard work. Lambs can become hypothermic very quickly. If they're wet and cold, they can lose body heat very, very quickly. And if you don't do something about it very quickly, it's a killer. And some people really were struggling. I was quite fortunate, my lambs were getting on by the time that hit, but other people really did struggle in that wet weather. And I think if you look in the market now, some of the sheep that are coming forward, there's some good sheep coming to the market, good lambs, but there's some pretty poor ones coming in. And those good ones really are ones that the mums didn't have too much of a check during that cold and wet weather, but the ones where the ewes had a bit of a check during that cold weather had an impact on their milk production, which has an impact on lambs, and then the dry summer on top of that just compounded it all.
Personally, it was my first year lambing, so I've never experienced it before, but the weather was quite difficult to cope with because it was -14 and it was snowing. It was quite difficult. I got snowed in at college, so I couldn't go home, but then I stayed down at the lambing shed and helped out because there's so many ewes just lambing all the time that there was just such demand that we needed to all stay there really.
When we were doing the nights, it was getting down to sort of -13 and 14. You put your hand on the metal gate and it'd start to stick to it, it was so cold. So it was just sort of a matter of keeping ourselves in a state where we could still work, really.
Cold, wet conditions are not ideal for sheep. You look at the history of sheep and where they came from, and they all have their origins in the Middle East in hot, dry conditions. And there's an old saying that said, better a roast lamb than a boiled one. Nothing to do with how they eat, but the fact that actually lambs will do better in hot, dry weather than they will in wet weather.
And hot and dry they would soon get.
When I met you in the summer, to my heartbeat sound, and we could be together, baby, as long as skies are blue. When I met you in the summer.
A wandering jet stream created an area of high pressure over the UK, causing one of the hottest summers on record. The thermometer soared to more than 35 degrees, Costa del Sol or Costa del Kent. In the fields and on the farms, the extended heatwave provided yet another headache for the agricultural sector. Large swathes of crops were parched, soil bone dry, and news of fields going up in flames became a daily headline.
Some of the crops on the lighter land, you could see the damage as it was occurring, because very often if you look at a growing crop as it's filling grain, if the flag leaf curls up on those hot days, that's when photosynthesis is shutting down because of the effects of lack of water. So I think those farmers particularly knew that they were going to have problems. But the lighter harvest overall across the country, because there's no doubt the centre belt of the country and the west had worse problems, overall we produce less grain in the whole country. The price has gone up, and that's somewhat to do with the UK production, but also the effect in Europe, because the hot weather also prevailed through a lot of Europe, and that's caused prices to increase, and they went as high as £200 a tonne of wheat. They're back about 170. If you go back 12 to 18 months, they were around 120 to 130. So that effect's come through. I think the critical part for farmers who have normally would sell an amount of their crop forward as we go through the growing season, I think what's caught some of them is that they then haven't had the yield. So they might have thought they sold 2/3 of the crop they expected to cut because of the lower yields in some crops in some areas. What's actually happened is they've then found they've sold nearly 100% of what they produced, and then when the price has gone up post-harvest, they haven't been able to take advantage of that. Those storms that I mentioned at the end of May weren't universally across the country or the county. So if you were lucky enough to be in the area where the storms ran and the rains came, you actually, despite everything else, had good yields. But in other areas where they missed the rains, 15 to 20% down. So it really is very much luck of the draw this year, I'm afraid.
Wineries have lucked out in the 2018 weather lottery. The conditions have meant grapes have flourished, with Biddenden vineyards experiencing a bumper harvest.
It's been pretty much a dream season for us, certainly here in Kent. We started off with the Beast of the East and the associated weather that went with that, and some of that was moisture in the ground. So when the vines started to grow, there was no stress for the plant, looking for water to be able to grow healthily. We ended up with a good canopy. Relating back to the serious frost we had last year, the vines obviously this year produced a very large crop, but more importantly we've then gone on to have all those days of 35 degrees weekend after weekend, which allowed that fruit to, or allowed that large crop to grow and rise to some very good sugar levels.
As well as large amounts of high quality fruit, there are new varieties of wine being produced as a result, something which could provide exciting opportunities for the next generation at Biddenden.
The weather in June was fantastic, and as I understand it, that's when the buds are reset for the following year. So when we prune this year in the winter and we tie the canes down for next year, we will end up with, in theory, a very good crop next year. As far as the wines are concerned, as we've said, it's producing wines that we've not been able to produce before. So they will be different. You will see Pinot Noirs and Chardonnays from vineyards, and the alcohol level will be slightly higher. That will give you a different mouthfeel to the wines that we've had.
Vineyards may have hit the jackpot, but as we've discovered, fortunes haven't favoured all in 2018. Everyone we've spoken to in this programme has reiterated farming is a resilient business and will adapt to handle future weather threats. But with climate change reaching boiling point, can Kent's farmers cope with an unpredictable year turning into years, decades, or even a foreseeable future of extremes?